LinkedIn presents.
What do our work lives and our mental health look like in the age of generative AI? I'm Morra Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health and work and asks, how can we do both better?
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by Oracle. AI may be the most important new computer technology ever. Do more and spend less like some of the world's most successful companies. Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/LinkedIn Podcast Network.
For the next few weeks, we'll be looking at the topic of anxiety and fears around generative artificial intelligence. I set out to do this series, and it felt straightforward, right? AI is this huge existential change, and it's coming. It seems like every day there's a scary headline that we might, as workers, as creators, as experts, become obsolete sooner than we thought. And that is scary. But as I started doing interviews for this series, I had a real change of perspective. I don't think AI is an imminent existential threat out to take away our professional jobs. It will change a lot about our jobs. But rather, right now, AI is a symbol about much of what's mentally unhealthy about work today. I don't actually think it's just AI that we're fearing right now. AI is a narrative or even an enemy for us to have. It's a place to put our anger and anxiety into. And the world feels like it's changing fast and things are uncertain. I talk to a lot of people, almost every day, who are unhappy in their jobs. Now, it's not exactly a scientific study, the people who I happen to interact with, but I've seen some themes emerge that I think might be helpful framing. First, we don't have a lot of faith in institutions or employers. We kind of expect them to take advantage of us where they can and leave us floating out on our own with no warning. Second, and related, shareholder capitalism rules, which means that if a technology is available to make things cheaper and make share prices go up, companies will probably use it. And finally, technology is truly our co-pilot from here on out, to borrow a phrase. Love it, hate it, we're inseparable from it, which means we're kind of along for the ride whenever it comes to all the uncertainty that tech brings. In some ways, like anxiety, it's a constant companion that we just need healthier ways of accepting and managing. In my own life, I joke that my Claude AI is my boyfriend. I'm with Claude, I use him almost every day, even at the same time that my own work feels threatened by the financial and IP consequences of artificial intelligence. And so over the next few episodes, we'll be unwinding a story of what it means to be an ambitious professional in the age of Gen AI. I encourage you to think of Gen AI as maybe not the whole story here, but as a lens to understand very human emotions around work today. Starting today with thoughts from Nilay Patel. As Editor-in-Chief of The Verge, the media company about technology and how we feel about it, Nilay has a fascinating lens on how AI is changing work, as someone running an organization, someone working in media, and someone who talks to eminent and varied tech leaders each and every day about their plans for the future. Nilay doesn't focus on mental health per se, but he has a valuable take on work and AI and how our lives are changing and where we should and shouldn't be worried. Here's our chat. I have to cheat and ask you as a first question to talk about one of my favorite things that you've ever said. You said, I feel like my whole career is validating that people have relationships with their laptops. I was curious what you meant by that.
Yeah, the mission statement of The Verge is that it is a publication about how technology makes us feel. To point out over and over again that we have emotional relationships with our technology, that our phones can make us feel things, that frustrating software is actually an emotional experience that you are having, that senior citizens often feel even more helpless when they are forced to confront new metaphors for how technology or apps or phones might work, and it breaks their old metaphors. And that is a destabilizing and often unfair experience for people to have. And so, I'm a technology journalist. I care a lot about feeds and speeds and specs. And all of that is in the service of these things make us feel emotions. That's what they're for. We build all of that technology mostly so we can make art for each other, mostly so we can communicate with each other. And the ways that the technology mediates that communication, facilitates that communication, destabilizes that communication, that's not science, that's not engineering. That is purely the purview of the humanities and the purview of culture. And that connection, I think, sometimes is really obvious and sometimes is so taken for granted that we pretend it's not even there.
Or we feel that we are being engineered to feel certain emotions, right? As in, we all know that social media is engineered to make us maybe feel a certain way when we get a certain response.
Yeah, I could probably spend the next hour unpacking what it means for all of us to know that and to use it anyway. And there's probably more to that than people want there to be. And there's probably less to it. So, most social media companies are trying to sell advertising. It's a very basic piece of we all know, it's a thing we all know. How do you make money? Senator, we sell ads is the famous Mark Zuckerberg response to that question. They programmed that moment. They told the senator to ask Mark Zuckerberg how he made money so that he could say we sell ads and make that seem so obvious and make it seem stupid that you didn't know that. That is a remarkable moment to have programmed, to have created that assumption for the feeling that you should already know this and that you should already have jumped to 50 conclusions about what it means to sell ads and how that might affect your perception of the service. When in fact, you are surrounded by advertising supported media that does not make you feel that way. Most television channels are advertising supported. I do not think the primetime broadcast block of NBC in the 90s, which was an advertising juggernaut, must-see TV, did not create the same outcomes as Facebook creates today. And so you're kind of in this place where we're asking everyone to make a set of assumptions all the time without actually saying what those assumptions are and why they logically connect. And I think the more we talk about that, the more we unpack it, and in particular, the more we understand why people post anyway, right? There's a real piece of that puzzle where you do it anyway. I think the more empowered we feel. It's still capitalism. We are still participants in the market, for better or worse. The more we have agency over those tools, the more we can clearly communicate what we'd like them to do. And the more, next to regulation and next to all these other forces, the tools might actually be what we want.
How does generative AI make you feel?
The more I have covered it, the more I've talked to the people working on it, the more I am convinced that generative AI is a very small development with potentially huge repercussions, sure, but ultimately is a very small development that will not lead to the outcomes that the hype bubble wants us to believe. And what I mean by that is we have long dreamed of natural language interfaces for computers. I had a Mac in the 90s that you could set a wake word to and you could say computer, and literally nothing after that happened. It would beep at you and you would say, great, now do something. And then it couldn't figure out anything else to do. Alexa, right? You have this computer you can talk to. People thought that was going to revolutionize all of our interactions with the internet. It did not happen.
Did you ever have a Teddy Ruxpin doll?
Yeah, I was a kid in the 80s. Sure,
Yeah,
it just couldn't do it.
it.
There was a literal cassette tape in those things. And it would fast forward and rewind to seek the answers to your queries. That's great. We want computers to understand us.
Right.
So just to go back to that emotional frame, I think there's a desire for us to not have to fight through a thicket of metaphors in order to use a computer. And what I mean by a thicket of metaphors is that even going from a desktop computer to a smartphone, your interface metaphor changes dramatically, right? Desktop computers are files and folders, and you have a mouse and you point at things and you click on them, and then you use a smartphone. It's like you're going to do one thing at a time. And we will so obfuscate the file system of this thing that college students today do not know about files and folders. It is simply not a part of their computing worldview. And so you look at all of this, you say, okay, all of these metaphors are challenging. They make computers harder to use. What we really want to do is just talk to them and have them understand us. LLMs, large language models, allow you to do that. Whether any of that is intelligence, whether any of that provides reasoning capabilities, whether any of that can replace even a person in a bad mood, remains to be seen. But that is the promise. And I think people have stepped very far ahead from the narrow development, which is exciting and the fulfillment of a long-standing dream, to the broad potential development, which is, now computers can do a bunch of things. And we actually don't know if those things are true. We don't know if that jump is real. We just know now you can talk to the computer. It has a better understanding of what you're saying, and it can communicate back to you in the same format.
So why has the media taken this advancement and made it into something existential in scale?
For a few reasons. One, I think it is existential for the media industry, bit of self-dealing that we are certainly guilty of at The Verge, but broadly, everyone is guilty of. Something that talks to you in a trusted way that can explain a difficult concept. That's what we do. That's what the money is for. And so
right.
you put a computer in the mix and you're like, the computer can now just go read the internet for you and give you the answer. Yeah, I think that's threatening for the media. There's a moral component to that. Should you be able to scrape the entire internet? There's a tedious sort of copyright component that I just find exciting
because you're an ex-lawyer.
Yeah, it's like,
yes.
But I just have to pre-apologize for my excitement over this tedious thing. There's all these court cases, and the New York Times is suing OpenAI, and the screenwriters are all mad, and all of that is, I think that's correct. I think it is correct for there to be an angry and sort of upset reaction at what is a taking. We're going to take all this information, we're going to feed it into computers, or sucking up a vast amount of power and resources, and for what? Kevin Roose gets to write an article about how Bing tried to make him break up with his wife in the front page of the New York Times. Like, that is a weird outcome. And all that's confusing. And so I think there's a lot of attention being paid to it because it is doing a task that other people can do. Then there are the companies themselves who are happy to lean into this, who are happy to say, well, we can just keep going. We're going to have artificial general intelligence that might destroy the world. We should be regulated because we might accidentally destroy the world is a real thing these companies are saying to our governments. And I think it's worth taking that seriously. If a bunch of people say, we think we might accidentally destroy the world unless you stop us.
Right.
Okay, you should probably hear them out. you should probably at least listen carefully to why they believe that is true. Part of that is in service to their own valuations. They want people to believe that they're on the road to artificial general intelligence, and these are monumental technical breakthroughs. Part of that is, I think, pure ego. Part of it is really hoping that is the case. But then there is one part of it that's real. What if you make a computer that can take actions out in the world all by itself without having to explain its reasoning or having any particular fail-safes inside? I think that mix of elements is already quite powerful. It already demands a lot of attention. And then there's one turn more, which is, this is already starting to impact some people at work. You already see a bunch of executives and companies that primarily have customer service components saying, well, people hate the phone tree. Now the phone tree can just listen to you. We've already outsourced or offshored our customer support teams. Now we can just have a robot do it, right? Or at least provide that first line of defense. And some jobs are starting to go. You can already see in Hollywood, writers' rooms have been getting smaller. And now there's a lot of worry that you'll just type in like, you know what? We already made 10 Fast and Furious movies. Like the 11th one can't be that much worse.
Press.
Right? Like off we go. The special effects folks are already feeling the impact of that work. So I think there's some real impacts, and they are just the first ripples. They're not actually the sort of big change. But all of that together means we have to pay a lot of attention to it, how it might change the industries that it could impact.
I have a theory. One of the therapists that I've spoken to for this series has talked a lot about the stories that we tell ourselves. We all tell ourselves stories, and they get in our way all the time at work. My boss called a 4 p.m. meeting, I'm getting fired, right? Don't know if that's true, but that's how it's making me feel. And I'm wondering that if a lot of our sort of collective anxiety about what AI means for us as workers, as professionals, is actually less about AI and more about the incredible lack of trust, faith in us, layoffs by email, corporate America treating people badly for many decades, and that AI just seems like maybe the final nail in the coffin, right? This is all part of a story that we have been feeling. You said writers' rooms have already been getting smaller, right? Staff are already stretched thin. And so why wouldn't corporate America take another technical advancement to get rid of us if they could?
There's some real teeth to that argument. It feels right. There's a lot to unpack in that argument. It depends on where you are in your career for that argument to really grab you. And I think particularly for younger people who already feel somewhat disposable, or people on entry-level positions at their companies who already feel like they will be the first to go or be the first to turn over, or that they're doing essentially commodity work, that feels very powerful, right? And it should. And then what's really interesting is I know a lot of lawyers, and I was a lawyer, I'm married to a lawyer, and even the partners are like, yeah, we kind of do the same thing every time. Like, we're just a therapist for our clients, and like the actual mechanism of the transaction or the litigation or whatever is pretty rote. Lots of big law firms, when a big company sues another big company, you end up paying a big law firm a ton of money for something called document review, where basically a bunch of 26 or 27-year-old first-year associates sit in a basement for a year just reading stuff to see what they can sue you over, right? Like that is the foundation of the big litigation industry. Well, it's like, that's a horrible job and most first-year associates don't like it. And B, a computer do it faster and probably more accurately.
Mm-hmm.
But can it actually find the twists and the turns that maybe a first-year associate who's trying to move up in the world finds? I don't know. So I think there's kind of a lot in there, right? There's this thesis that actually AI might impact the white-collar jobs first, because the big law firm that hires the AI to do the doc review will be cheaper than the big law firm that hires 100 first-year associates, and that means the partner salaries might go up or down. Like, you don't know. So I think there's all these effects of what happens when the computers can communicate in language.
Mm-hmm.
And what we don't know is whether the computers can actually reason, whether they can actually solve problems in a consistent way, whether they can be trusted, whether we are liable for their outputs. Like, in the legal system just has not contended with what happens if the chatbot on the car dealership website offers you the car for free, a real thing that has already happened, right? So you just end up with a series of escalating problems that someone else has to solve. The legal system has to solve a bunch of these problems. The market for legal services has to solve some of these problems. There's this very famous study that says an AI chatbot is often a more understanding and convincing medical provider than a doctor, because it'll just waste time on you. It'll just sit there talking to you, whereas a doctor is like, yeah, you're sick. Like, get out, take 2 time, I'll call you tomorrow, right? That is an emotional relationship with a computer. It is willing to have the time. A computer's time, or at least a large cloud computing model's time, is not limited in the way that an individual doctor's time is limited, and they are billed by procedure or patient or whatever. And now you're having a fight with two sides of capitalism while you're trying to care for your sick body. That's confusing. So I think there's all this stuff remains to be seen. Like, which experiences will we prefer? Which experiences will be consistently good or great enough to actually have an impact on the market? And which ways will we feel empowered? And the way that I would just encourage a listener to feel empowered is by trying to use the tools, right? I don't think people feel as powerless by the presence of macros in Microsoft Excel as they do by the concept of AI in Gmail. And that there's a weirdness there. You can use both of the tools. They are available to you. And if you are the sort of person in an entry-level job who gets really good at Excel, your ability to get the next job actually goes up. Or at least your belief that you could get the next job, or you could make something better, or your ability to pitch some improvement gets increases, and your confidence increases. And I'm not saying that it's everyone's responsibility to become an AI expert, but having agency with the tools is what builds confidence and enables you to take the next step, or at least understand the changes in the market around you.
Yeah. I want to pick up on the piece of relationship. And you had talked almost that there's a little bit of wish fulfillment and wishful thinking and what we want generative AI to do for us. You had the CEO of Replica, which is an AI chatbot that you have a relationship with, on Eugenia Kaida, I think it is. And she cited the psychologist Carl Rogers' model, which I thought was super interesting. His basic theory is we grow as people when we have someone in our life who gives us unconditional regard, right? Like you said, who listens to us, who takes time, and who has empathy and unconditional positive regard for us. And I was thinking about that in the context of management. Very few managers, even those who are supposed to be mentoring talent, have unconditional positive regard, empathy, or time. And yet the Replica bot seems to have proven to have all three for someone. So could, at some level, a Gen AI bot be a better manager or mentor for me than my real boss?
At the risk of being very reductive and comparing people in the workplace to sheep, literal sheep.
Literal sheep. Okay.
I will reference a story we did about an AI-powered robotic sheepdog. And this thing was, it was announced. There's great fanfare. The robot sheepdog is finally here. And we just happened to have our AI reporter at the time was a very dry, very sharp British man named James Vincent. And he was in England. And he was like, I don't know, man, I have access to sheep farmers. And so he went and he took the pitch of the robot sheepdog to a bunch of sheep farmers. And they all 201 laughed at this thing. And they said the sheep are much smarter than this. And they have a relationship with the sheepdog. And the sheepdog is very good. And the sheepdog is often very kind, a famously sort of gentle, herding. We train them as pets. And sometimes they hurt our children, right? It's like this famous example. I'll send you the story so listeners can read it. In it, one of the sheep farmers was like, but it is important to note that the sheep are aware that the dog has teeth and can use the teeth. And there's no way we're ever going to let the robot have teeth or use the teeth. Like, it's just not going to happen. They're going to knock this thing over. The second they find out they can bully the robot, it's all over. The robot will cease to be an effective sheepdog. And I thought that was so interesting. And I actually asked Eugenia about this. I've talked to a lot of folks about this very concept, that your relationship with other people is sort of predicated, not on teeth necessarily, but on the sense that you're trying to stay within a normative environment. You're trying to make sure everyone feels good at a baseline level. You have the very real ability to make another person feel very bad. It's almost our default to you have to try to not make other people feel bad. And you see all over the place that's slipping in a lot of people's sort of default response to the presence of another person is to just make them feel bad or scream or yell. Our social norms are already slipping in a way. And then most importantly, I think in context of management, you have to tell people when they're doing a good job or a bad job. And if you don't ever tell someone they're doing a bad job, or importantly, that sometimes it's okay to do a bad job and the service is doing a better job somewhere else, you're actually not providing any constructive feedback. One of the most important pieces of feedback I've ever got in my entire career was an old boss who said, it's fine if this is a C. We just need to get it out the door. It's fine. Stop. You are trying to make everything an A+ all the time. It's fine if this one thing is a C. Just make sure all this other stuff is an A+.
And they meant it.
They meant it. They're very sincere about it. They're like, you just need to move this down the line. Just get it off your desk. And I'm not sure that I've completely internalized when things can be an A or a B or a C, but sometimes things can be a C. And I think you need someone who can evaluate your work at this is a C and be honest that it's a C and say, well, no, that's got to go be an A, or be honest that it's a C and say, get it off your plate so you can make the other thing an A. And I don't know that an always on LLM who's there to love you every minute of the day. You can disappoint your mother. There's a tension there that's important that none of these systems can actually provide you.
But your mother also has teeth.
Yeah. Oh, do they ever? Especially the good ones, right?
Yeah. Right. And I think the other thing, and I can give you lots of exercises on how to be a C+ student, because it's a really healthy thing for those of us who are driven always to achieve and be a little perfectionistic, is that we learn from modeling people we respect. And your boss was your boss, and they were saying, hey, this is okay. And so your brain says, oh, okay, well, if he can do it, that must mean it's okay sometimes. And you file that away.
Yeah. Even in a conversation on the Sea of Replica there, we talked a lot about what it might mean for a generation of people to grow up thinking that some friends can never be hurt so much they go away. I mean, she's trying to sell a bot that always loves you, right? That will never be mean to you in return. And, I do think it's healthy to have something there that you can talk to. I think a lot of people suffer from not having anyone to talk to. And so, part of the pitch is someone is better than nothing. But there's some turn at which you have to raise the stakes. And whether the stakes are an actual friend that might stop being your friend, or whether the stakes are a boss that wants you to do better, or if consistently you do badly, will ask you to leave, or even if you're, mercenary in your career and you're just the job for 18 months so you can get the next job, those stakes are important. They actually, I think, push us to succeed and to become better. I don't know that these LLMs really offer anybody any stakes.
We can't learn because we're never interrupted or meet a wall.
Yeah.
And told that we have to find another solution or do it better. I want to talk a little bit about expertise. One of the things that I think about as a content creator and a writer in AI, and I've had it happen in my own work, is that it's going to steal my expertise from me, or it's going to democratize expertise so much. I mean, you already see this with things like Canva, right? You had the CEO of Adobe on, which was a great interview. And, he talked about the fact that everyone has a story inside them, but they don't always have the tools to properly express that story. And that Adobe and also AI will basically give everyone the tools to express the story. And that really got my feathers in a ruffle because I thought, God, I've spent years honing my craft, working so hard to tell a story. I don't want everybody to just be able to tell a good story. How do you think about not just AI, but the general democratization of access to tools in the context of people who are driven and want to become experts and want to become the best at what they do? I assume you're one of them.
My conception of myself is not a podcaster or an editor or a manager. It's a writer. I write sentences for a living. And boy, do I work hard at sentences. And boy, do I have incredibly demanding standards for sentences and how good they are. Like at the line level, like literal sentences, not conceptually, like actual sentences. I can identify a good sentence and a bad sentence. And when I write a bad sentence, I get fairly upset at myself and try to write a better stuff.
Are you a sort of like brevity focused person or metaphor? Like what's your ideal sentence in your mind?
I'm going to say I'm a brevity focused person, but I'm by far the longest writer at The Verge. And my fellow editors give me crap for this all the time. But my goal is to make every sentence valuable. And if you don't look at the sort of gestalt of the whole thing, you're like sentence by sentence, they're all bangers. You tend to write a lot more sentences than you would otherwise. So, my ideal sentence communicates one thought clearly. And that's always kind of what I'm going for. And that's really hard to do. There is yet to be an LLM that can write like me. It is just really difficult. I have producers on my show who try to write like me, so I can just read the copy and move on and they can get to work. They can't do it. And I don't mean to say that in like an egotistical way. Yeah. Just they have told me they can't. Like this is not a thing that anyone can do. We're just going to put the words on the page and you can rewrite, get them out in your voice. I've been writing sentences and thinking about sentences very intently for 15 or 20 years. I don't think everybody has those same relationships to sentences I do. That's just a personal quirk. At some point, the LLM might be able to write like me. That's a real thing that might happen. But my expertise is in knowing what to write about. And so this is a split that I would give you. Like I care very deeply about the craft of communicating and how I communicate and what my voice is used for and how to deploy it in literal sentences. But for what is actually the problem? For what is new ideas? Fundamentally new ideas, like taking two new pieces of information and saying, okay, here is the story that these two pieces of information are trying to tell you. That's hard. And LLMs literally are statistical representations of the past. They will not be able to do that work as well as I can, even if they get 50% as good at writing sentences as I am. They'll never get to 100, but 80% is good at writing sentences as I can. They will never be able to go identify the new idea.
Say more about that, because I think a lot of people think of LLMs as crafting new ideas based on a volume of information. But you just said they're statistical models of the past.
Yeah. So, LLM at its base level of work is to ingest an enormous amount of data. Mostly that is the internet that is publicly available. That's the thing that they have ingested the most of. And then the work of training the model, which is very energy intensive and very difficult, is figuring out the statistical relationship between different kinds of information in all the ingested data. So whether that is the statistical relationship between different words across the printed internet, or the statistical relationship of different colors and values of pixels, brightness values, color values of pixels and images that it has ingested, it's that big statistical body of relationships that is an AI model. And then when you ask it, when you prompt it in some way, the process of inference is generating what amounts to a very fancy autocomplete answer to your prompt. One of my favorite one is you say, make me a famous video game plumber. Every model, regardless of its copyright or trademark protections or its safety guidelines, will produce a picture of Mario. Every time. Because there's no other statistical relationship between that prompt and some pixels except Mario. There are no other famous video game plumbers. Like there's one, and it will always make you a picture of Mario because it's a one-to-one statistical relationship. And so you just like look at that. You take a minute and just like think about what that means. It means that unless there's a pre-existing statistical relationship in the world, the model cannot generate the information. And you can kind of force these models into doing something else. You can say, here are two things, smash these ideas together, and you can watch it try to smash them together, but it does it without any understanding. So any nuance or new conflict or you can just see it's always kind of dull. And human beings are much more creative than this. We tend to, if I told you to generate a famous video game plumber, maybe you'd do Mario, like there's a chance, or maybe you would just draw a plumber. Like, who knows? Like, who knows what would happen?
Right.
Maybe you've never played a video game and you're not burdened by the past in that way, and you'll just do something else. So I just think there's an awful lot of opportunity in being original, simply because on a technical level of how these models work.
Does your AI model really know code? Its specific syntax? Its structure? Its logic? IBM's Granite code models do. They're purpose-built for code and trained on 116 different programming languages to help you generate, translate, and explain code quickly. Because the more your AI model knows about code, the more it can help you do. Get started now at ibm.com/granite. IBM. Let's create.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by Oracle. AI may be the most important new computer technology ever, but AI needs a lot of processing speed, and that gets expensive fast. Upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. Do more and spend less. Take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/LinkedIn Podcast Network.
So when you think about expertise and craft, is your advice to people to dive even deeper in what they're passionate about and hone a craft? Is it to become critical thinkers? Like, how do we think about becoming expert in the age of AI?
That's a really good question. A lot of it is an expert in what? In so many jobs, the expertise or the craft is in using the tool. And not even to a particular end. Like every company has people in it who are just really good at using Microsoft Excel. Most companies have people who are really, really good at using PowerPoint to make decks for their executives to go raise money or whatever happens on that side of the business. And I think it's those folks where the craft isn't using the tool, in taking a natural language input from someone else and then using some complicated tool to deliver some comprehensible output on the other side. I think that's the place that's most at risk, right? Our interface paradigm for computers is changing. And so you see a lot, that moment tends to have a lot of disruption with it. And there's been a lot of interface paradigm changes in the past 30 years that you can just point to, right? You went from text-based computers, command line interface computers, to Windows and mice, and like a whole generation of people, their jobs changed. Punch cards to command line interfaces, a whole generation of people, their jobs changed. We went from that to the Mac, and like what you see is what you get. Page layout, a whole generation of people's jobs changed. And from that to desktop publishing, to touchscreens, in photography, right? Like the whole universe of jobs changed. The internet then happened. And you just see these moments of huge change. It's a big stack of things that change, and the foundation of it is usually a computing paradigm change. We're going to go from running all the applications locally to running all the applications in the web. A whole bunch of people got different kinds of jobs the second that happened. So now here we are at another one. Some things will change. I don't think that's the big disruptive change. I think the big disruptive change comes when some people get really good at that, and that becomes a skill unto itself. I think this big disruptive change comes when the people who have no access to somebody who's really good at PowerPoint begin to communicate at a baseline level of quality that it's as good as the person with the PowerPoint has today. I'm generally excited about that. If what we end up with is we push the state of the art in communication forward in some way, because some people get really good at the tools, and we bring up the floor because people who had no access to the tools suddenly can do it better, I think that's a net benefit. So Canva is, the example you gave. Canva is so democratic that they instruct people that they cannot trademark the logos that they make in Canva, because everyone has the same logo. So like sort of definitionally, if you use one of their templates, someone else has used one of their templates and you cannot get a trademark on the logo template. That's just fundamentally incredible that the world of high quality logos has gone to the point where the people who make the software are like, we know it's good. We know you like it. You can't trademark it because someone else has used the same logo.
And we're okay with that. That's the other thing, is we're like, cool, we're still going to use it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, we get a lot of responses to the Decoder podcast. The professionals were all very angry at the Adobe CEO conversation. They were upset. They were mad that we talked to them, which is wild and whatever. But they have a lot of gripes of Photoshop and the cost of Creative Cloud and Adobe generally. So that all came out. we have essentially the same conversation with the CEO of Canva, who's said all the same things. Like those conversations, you put them next to each other. It's people who make creative software talking about how AI will make people creative faster. And the response to the Canva episode was like, cool. Like I use Canva at my job. Like I am a social media manager and I use Canva to make Instagram layouts. And like, I would love it if those Instagram layouts were a little bit better because I'm already under all this time pressure at work to do more and more and more. And of course I want Canva to do better. And so you just see the audience has this like wildly different reaction based on the tool you're using. Canva is not meant for people who charge high rates for their work because of their expertise in Photoshop. It's meant for people who otherwise would have no access at all. The promise they're making to folks is we'll make you better. We'll raise the floor. And no one ever really gets mad at raising the floor. They get mad at commoditizing the ceiling.
I agree with you. And in a way, I think Canva is one of the most revolutionary things that we never talk about as being revolutionary. I mean, in my world, I was been in political marketing for decades. Like it has changed everything. But here's what it's done that's bad, is that in capitalism, people are no longer willing to pay as much for the skills that require Adobe because they're like, I'll just get a 22-year-old and they'll do Canva. It's good enough. And that's a problem. And that's how I often think of AI for a lot of us, especially I'm getting older. I'm expensive.
Yeah. And I don't know that the platforms have any incentives to show people anything other than good enough. All right. If you're Google and you run YouTube, it's really weird for the YouTube content moderation team or the recommendation algorithm team to say, we think AI content is bad, because a huge other part of Google is ferociously making AI content.
That's right. It has spent all its money.
It's the same problem at Meta. It's you name a tech company, they all have this sorting problem where some enormous part of the company has to say that the work that the other part of the company generates is bad. Those things are just going to crash into each other, and I don't know who's going to win. The reason all the big platform companies, particularly social companies, are investing so heavily into video, AI-generated video, it's not some noble mission to democratize Adobe Premiere. It's so that you can plug in assets and have it generate video advertising in social video. So you're like, here's the shoes I want to sell. Like, here's some copy. Like, push a button, and it'll just make you a compelling video ad. And it won't make 5 for 5 cohorts. It'll make 5 million individually targeted video ads. That's the dream. I mean, that's literally the thing that they're chasing after. That this thing already, glimmers of it already existing.
My own clients' ad agencies are already doing that. Gone are the days of the art director spending time. It's now like we can hyper target. So let's just make some Canva graphics and let the targeting do its thing.
Right, and even that is fairly manual. Like you have to have that idea. You have to like assemble the stack of technologies. You have to get an army of offshore Canva users to generate. I'm saying this is like the glimmer of this is already built into the TikTok ad product, where TikTok is selling this capability directly to advertisers. And so like, you just see everyone's sort of terrified at this moment. Like, here's why we're barreling towards this. It's not as noble as we're all saying out loud. It's to generate more good enough advertising at massive scale and hopefully sell more shoes. I am hopeful that the market responds to this by saying there will be a thing that provides some higher quality, that some people will get paid higher rates. And I think the challenging part when you democratize a capability is that something that used to be hard for a few people to do and guaranteed high rates for that whole set of a few people, the bottom's going to fall out and only the very best get a higher rate. And that rate might be actually higher than it was before. But the sort of like make a living high rate might just disappear. The knock-on effects of that are crazy. Like, how do you become the person who spends years grinding away in the middle to become the person who's at the top? Where does that market go? Who are those people going to be? Who is going to subsidize that work? I was very fortunate to get paid a bunch of money to write sentences for 20 years and have the time to think about all the sentences. Where is that going to come from? If when I started, I was just writing AI quality slop sentences, someone's got to say, well, I think there's some potential in your sentences. And I don't know who that person's going to be. So I think that stuff is worth worrying about. But overall, that Canva example, right? The floor is going to get higher. It's very hard to say to a bunch of small businesses, we want your floor to stay low, right? It's very hard to go to people who don't have the ability to communicate, in the formats that we now demand communication to be in, and say, actually, you can't. And that is a real tension.
What you just described is a hollowing out as intense as the hollowing out of the middle class when industrialization and globalization came and said, I don't need you to assemble this. I'm going to send it somewhere else or have a machine do it. It is that replacement that scares us so much about AI.
I think in the context of industrialization, like maybe those jobs weren't good. Like maybe they actually weren't good. Maybe they actually hurt people. Maybe working in a car plant with low safety standards was not a great job, and maybe it caused a bunch of repetitive stress injuries. Here we're talking about people clicking around in their laptops, like in a real way. Like the knock-on benefits of we shouldn't have jobs that require OSHA to exist, like doesn't exist in the sort of creative class in the same way. Like maybe we shouldn't have so many jobs where people do SEO slog for content agency. Like it's hard to make the same comparison, right?
Well, I would actually flip it and say, and being a proud Democrat, good union jobs where people could have a good life, even if it was hard work, might be more preferable than someone who's really smart spending all their time writing SEO copy for selling stupid stuff, right?
Yeah, I'm just getting at some jobs were dangerous, like openly dangerous, and we required them, and we paid high rates, and we have unions, and we have workplace safety standards, and all this stuff because the actual task was physically dangerous. And so there was an argument for automation in those cases that transcended the economic arguments. I'm saying there was another set of arguments with industrialization in particular that I think lent themselves to automation and robotics and stuff in a way that maybe we're so far into it now that it's like hard to see.
It's hard to see. It's hard to imagine. Well, that's the other thing. It's hard to imagine the world any other way. I want to wrap up your advice because we've sort of said AI isn't the biggest shift that we all seem to be making it out, but we've also said it's going to change a lot of people's lives. When you think about the story that you're telling about generative AI as a journalist, as the host of a platform, do you weigh the scale on either end?
In particular, I know it's going to change the internet. There's no reframing that. The internet is already being flooded with AI work. The conflict at the platform companies with the recommendation algorithms having to not tolerate that work, but also pretend it's fine. Very real. The joke I make is that even if at the best case scenario, some LLM produces C- work, if you point a canon of C- work at any business model on the internet, you have upended it. You've broken it. And you can see this all over the place. Like fanfiction.net is so overwhelmed with AI, and it's like a huge problem. And that's just like a tiny little community of fan fiction writers, right? Well, a huge community, but it's not like all of Hollywood. It's like a tiny creative community in the grand scheme of things is having an impactful problem because of AI. Instagram is having this problem. Photographers are already having, when they make the edits in Photoshop and Instagram labels their work as edited with AI, because the work appears to be devalued. And so the photographers are mad. They're like, this isn't an AI picture. I just did this one edit and the tool happens to have AI built into it. Stop devaluing my work. This is a huge problem. And so you can already see it with the internet at scale in a real way. So that's one thing. We know what to cover there. We know the shape of those arguments. And we know that because we're an independent publication, we can just loudly communicate our values inside of those arguments. It's quite a luxury, actually. What I don't know is whether AI can actually do all the things people say it can. And so, if you listen to Decoder, I ask every AI I see, can it actually do all this shit? I don't know if it can. And their answer is like, I don't know. It's like, good question. And I wonder, there's this concept that I heard at a conference called XOXO that I was just at, called pretender technologies. And it is a thing that gives you a glimpse of what might happen, but it can't actually get you there. And so I don't know. I truly do not know if this is a pretender technology or not. But I know that everyone is imagining what would happen on the other side of it. And so that's the thing that I'm thinking about is on the one side, I know what's going to happen to the internet. It's bracingly clear already. On the other side, I don't know if this technology can iterate its way to the finish line.
Where do you stand on we're going to lose 40% of all jobs as we know it statistic?
I think you have to believe that this technology can do it. Maybe. I don't want I'm not doom and gloom. I'm not optimistic. I'm saying I'm stuck at the assumption built into that number is the assumption that I'm spending most of my time trying to figure out.
Last question. I think a lot of us feel that we live in a world where a bunch of billionaires tell us how to think and act and live our lives and do our work. What's your advice to these guys? Because I think everyone's doing a really bad job helping us emotionally prepare for all these changes. I don't see thoughtful communications rollout plans when companies are starting to adopt or even invest in AI, because none of them can use it. You're right. None of them are like doing the things that we're all scared of, but they're spending money. They're acquiring businesses. They're deploying teams. But I don't know that they're giving us skills to sort of like cope with all this change or even think about it. To your original point of like, we have emotions around this stuff, deep ones.
Yeah, it's funny. My advice for the billionaires is different than my advice for the companies. I interview a lot of CEOs on Decoder. A lot of them are billionaires. And like the thesis of Decoder is like, do you know what's going on? Like, are you in it? Like, tell me how your company is structured is a deceptively difficult question. It implies a lot of things, right? It implies that they know, right? Or that they care, or that they do anything other than mess around with the org chart. I don't know that a lot of CEOs do anything other than mess with the org chart, by the way. It's the thing that they're most in control of.
And it messes with people's minds a lot. So
yeah, and this is a way to impose some amount of control over an organization, not to tell people what to do, but to move them around, to make different configurations with different incentives. So for the billionaires, the CEOs, I would challenge them to get way on the ground, to actually experience their own products, to actually live a life of the proles down with the smartphones, right? Because they don't do it. They don't live the lives we do. They don't have the digital experiences we do. They really do not. And when they do, their experiences of the same tools are so warped by their own fame or their own perceived influence that it breaks them. Like Elon Musk got broken by Twitter because he had a singular Twitter experience. He was so famous and so popular and so many people were trying to scam him and all this stuff that he was not having the same experience on Twitter as a regular person was having.
Which is crappy,
right? Straightforwardly, or worse, completely anonymous. Most people sign on Twitter and they post a tweet being pre-Elon and no one responded to them. That was the experience that most users of the service had. And if you're like, I'm going to buy it and fix it for me, Elon Musk, because everything I do is the most popular tweet on the service, your perception of reality is already different than everybody else. And so my advice to billionaires is like, use your own products. Like, honestly, like use your own products as a regular person. Like, try to have some empathy for the people who use this stuff. Google, for example, famously cuddly organization, right? Slides in the office, logo designed by a 5-year-old, the whole thing. Google has no empathy for the people who use its products. It kills products at a rate unlike any other company in the world. And they're always like, yeah, only a few million people depended on this one service. And it's like, that's a few million people.
That's a lot of people.
That's actually quite a few people. And it's like, we'll just figure it out. And it's like that, I think, at the top of the companies is very much missing. For the companies themselves, I don't think that anyone has articulated a meaningful product feature using AI yet, right? And so the opportunity for those folks is to say, what are we actually going to enable people to do? It is not putting chatbots across everything. It is not generate a picture of a famous video game plumber. It's not Google got in trouble for this ad that was like, write a letter to this gymnast for my kid. That's not it. It has to be something more meaningful and more impactful and more directly relevant to people's lives. And I don't know that we've invented that yet. I think we've invented a lot of demos.
I made a lot of changes to org charts.
Yeah, that has definitely happened. We've bought a lot of NVIDIA GPUs.
Oh, yes.
But have we made one killer app yet?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
That's it for this episode of The Anxious Achiever. The show is produced and edited by Mary Dew with production support and sound engineering by Nick Krinko. If you like what you heard, head to your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. It really matters, and we appreciate the time and effort it takes. And if you don't subscribe or follow the show already, now's the time. And let us know what you'd like to hear more of. I get some of my best ideas from my listeners, so find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. You could find my weekly newsletter there as well. A big thanks to LinkedIn and all the listeners out there and our guests in the anxious achiever world. Until next time.